Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you guys for coming. Hopefully you're going to learn some things, be reminded of some things, and we'll all come away writing better reports, which is the goal of what I'm talking about. My name is Benjamin Robinson. I'm an information security consultant that has been doing a lot of NIST-based assessments and some penetration testing, other sorts of security assessments for quite a while now. You see a lot of audiences, and a lot of what we also see doing some work is reviewing of other people's reports, and it's kind of like, hey, how can we all start to do better? So that's what I'm hoping to help facilitate here. As we all know, working in information security, it's very difficult to message even within our own community. Viz's keynote speech yesterday was a great reminder of this, right? We have a lot of jargon. Jargon changes by sector of that industry that you're working in. It's difficult to communicate amongst ourselves as well as to actually communicate to the business. And unlike a lot of IT, we actually do have to message not just to IT, but also to the business. Every breach that happens, we see more and more business awareness, and I think that's some of what's driving our industry maturity is these C-levels are coming along and they're saying, hey, I need to understand this a little bit better. And that's part of what we need to address in our reports is talking to multiple audiences. We also need to get away from assuming that our audience is going to be proficient with information security. Even though we ourselves start struggling with things, you know, the broader the audience, the harder that message is, and the easier it is to misinterpret. And I think, again, Viz in his keynote, he's like, hey, here's 3 headlines about one incident. Look at how different these interpretations truly are to people that understand. So getting rid of some of those assumptions is what we want as well. And even though the majority of us really have no interest in doing sales and like being in security because we have a great community, we really do have a message that we have to sell. That requires buy-in, and that buy-in has to be sold to 3 audiences, which we are going to define. And there's challenges with that too. How do you say the same thing and ensure that different people with different levels of understanding really understand what you're saying? So let's tackle this. First off, we have to know our audience. And as I already said, business. We have to know business. So we're going to be talking about scope a few times. Just like security, laying that groundwork of OSINT is really important. Same thing with writing a report. A lot of the messaging that we're going to get, our audience is already aware of, and we're educating ourselves and then reiterating it back to them. All of this kind of comes down to having clear business objectives. And this is a different scope than our scope of work. We need to make sure that our scope of work helps them develop their business. We got to help them, and IT is a business too, right? So that subservice, understanding those objectives as well. The efforts in reporting that we're doing has to help them somehow. And in order for us to really hone in on that messaging, we have to understand what they're trying to accomplish with our piece of work. Is this just a compliance test that we're doing? Maybe they don't really care about the messaging. Does that excuse us from writing a good report that drives help? You're always going to get at least one person that you can connect with and really wants some positive outcome from your effort. There's always some buy-in at an organization, even if they can't really afford that buy-in. Helping them advocate their message, another vital instrument. We also have to understand who is responsible and what they are responsible for. And again, we'll define our audiences here. Brief overview of those 3 audiences. We already mentioned C-level. That's executive management. Below them we have management. And management manages technical staff. And that technical staff is what most of us probably operate at, since we tend to be technical, come from IT, want to stay there because it's fun. They also need some advocates as well. A lot of times their prioritization doesn't get heard by management. So we really need to drive communication across all three of those levels. Executive management has to talk effectively to management, so both of them have to understand what we're saying in different contexts, which means executive management has to understand executive management. Management has to understand executive management and technical management or resources, and technical resources really have to understand those two levels above them as well, because they have to care about that messaging more immediately. Management, because that's what's driving their prioritization. So how can we help them with all of this? Writing better reports. That is what we are going to leave them with, and that's what sticks with them. We're more than just a report. We're not doing this just for the fun of the assessment or the test. We're handing off a product, and that product is largely represented by this report. So we're going to talk a little bit about analytical and technical writing. We're going to talk about essay writing, which you'll remember from high school. We're going to talk about how to get to the point and repeat yourself. We don't want to repeat ourselves, but that's the crafting of the messaging, right? And finally, we're going to throw some tips out there to talk about how you can mature your expertise and make report writing a little bit easier. This doesn't have to be such a daunting task if we can structure and format our efforts so that we can define and craft a tool set that really helps us out. And this is one of the things where writing a better report, it helps the client, but it also helps you. There's a lot of scalability, and we want to find these things that we can actually hone in on, structure our output, and figure out how we can leverage them with other efforts that we have to do so that we can spend less time writing. So that's what we're going to cover. Any questions at this point? Okay. We'll have questions at the end as well if we have some time, which I think we will because I'm kind of talking fast here. So knowing your audience, we have to define these audience. I don't know how many of you are familiar with security frameworks such as NIST, but generally what we're doing is we're distilling it down into three control families. We have administrative controls, operational controls, and technical controls. And you can almost see some parallels with our audience messaging to these things, right? We have executive management. They kind of care about the administrative controls, not one-to-one in that we're talking about policy, right? But they're talking about budgeting impacts. They're talking about business concerns, this type of administrative control, the highest level of understanding. This is the one that needs to be the most distilled. This is where we are going to, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, aggregating our content so that we can say, hey, senior management, you need to understand these 3 to 5 points, hopefully in one page. Management, they have to get buy-in from executive management, so it's important that they understand in a little more depth of detail what they need to do. And they also need that further depth of detail because they have to manage their technical resources. So how do we make management's job easy? Prioritization, which also applies to technical staff as well. All of these people, they care about their time. And I have here word count is not equal to quality, and I mean this is critical takeaway. I think a lot of us when we hear, hey, write a better report, hey, write to 3 audiences, I don't want to do that much writing. Well, you don't necessarily have to do that much writing, it just has to be to the point. Distilling it down, making things repeatable helps save us time, as well as, not wasting a lot of words on reiterating what you're saying. Which ironically I'm doing a little bit of right now. Risk management. The other thing that we tend to do as an organization is distill everything down to risk. And this does a few things. Number one, it allows people to talk about complex technical details in some aggregated terms. So instead of saying, there are these 92 findings, well, if all of them have a root cause, you don't need to talk about that 92 times. Let's make this more digestible. And that first aggregation of layer of detail is, kind of how we trickle everything up, because we're kind of working backwards here, right? We do the technical testing where we're caught in all of the details. For the report writing, we kind of have to step back and say, wait, now how do I get to these other two audiences, right? How do I even make this approachable to the technical staff? And that's something that is definitely communicated throughout our entire report. Another point here is common language. With writing a report, you definitely need to be consistent with your terminology. Even if you're misusing a term and you don't know that, be consistent. Hopefully you're not misusing any terms, but this is where common language is going to help you not only look mature with your delivery, but it's going to serve to not alienate and confuse your audience. If you're using terms interchangeably that have different meanings, if there's even the possibility of interpreting those differently, you should be defining those in a glossary. And you should also be catching those in a proofread where you say, hey, wait a minute, is this really what I meant to say? So let's talk about executive management. Who these people are. These are generally the non-technical people. Even if they came up as a technical person, that was probably a while ago in their career. At this point, they are probably aware that they do not have the technical know-withal to filter through a lot of detail. They probably don't have the time to do so because they waste most of their days in meetings. Whoops, I think I just fat-fingered something. Sorry about that. So they're, as with each audience, their time is definitely important to them. So, did I mess up the whole display? That's weird. I think it's catching it now. That's weird. Let me try this again. Sorry, guys. There we are. Problems. Wow, that was on time. Improving or worsening. Executive management cares not about how hard they can be owned. What they care about is what that means to them, what they can do about it, if they need to do anything about it. And this is where our voice starts to come through in our report. A big part of what they are paying us for on delivery is to weigh in with our opinions. We don't necessarily have to give them the exact answer that they carry forward, but we should at least be able to facilitate that discussion. And in order to do that for executive management, we want to help them identify those risks and reduce those risks. They're the ones that choose how much they want to spend on it, whether or not they want to remediate it. If we can do anything that helps them identify some of that costing, these are the main points that they care about. They also want to care about what's going wrong internally. A lot of times they're going to know this, but they're going to be getting it from managers, and those managers may not be comfortable communicating how bad something is, or they may be trying to make something worse so they can get additional budgeting. So in a way, you're acting as an independent voice, a barometer, to kind of help them gauge how important this is. Ultimately, executive management cares about their return on investment, and this return on investment is just as much tied to their reputation as it is their bottom line dollar, right? They need all of these things in order to succeed and grow their business. So, selling risk management is difficult enough. We're pretty bad at math. You can lie with numbers. Everything is subjective, all of that. But this is where you have to pick a line and you have to say, based on the experience that I have, or we as an organization has, this is what we really think matters. You need to prioritize that with executive management. And you're not going to have a lot of time to sell this. 1 or 2 pages is the way to go, and I think we will touch on that in a little bit. Business objectives. Main drivers: compliance, cost savings, resource justification. These are the things that management is trying to advocate for. They are going to take what they want and build these things up. We're trying to help management build those arguments, and we're trying to prepare senior management for receiving those arguments, right? So management. This is our next level of detail, and management kind of has a hard job in that they have to both sell up and sell down. They have to take the message that their technical staff has, present that to senior level management, get buy-in, and then make sure that their technical staff is actually doing what senior management really wants to do, even if that's what technical staff knows not to be the best thing or doesn't want to work on. It's a tough job. Soft skills, right? So this one, you're going to have more depth of detail. You're going to have a level of aggregation that can be more than 1 or 2 pages. It's probably going to address all of your talking points that you have as far as what your real risk-rated findings are. You're going to identify each of those individually. Hopefully you are going to prioritize these things. And you're also going to educate management on what they need to know about it. They don't need to know specific configuration details, but they do need to know more than this may adversely affect reputation. And part of that is so that they can prioritize. Part of that is so that they can be prepared to address detail. And part of it helps them with the sniff test on technical resources. Like we've probably all been there where it's like, no, I'm just going to throw some jargon at you until you don't make me do what I want to do. So we want to help management manage, basically. The other thing that management cares about is not putting their neck on the line. And so one thing that we can do is we can demonstrate that they are not alone in the world, and we do that with statistics. Hey, look, these other companies are doing this. Hey, look, this worked for them. And that way they don't have to say, we're brash, we're going to try something new and different that nobody's ever done before. That's really daunting, right? So technical staff. You know what? I'm going to back up real quick. I forgot to explicitly say their time matters. Again, we don't need to give them the full level of detail. Just like senior management, just like technical resources, time matters. We're trying to save them time. So with technical staff, they still care about their time. We're trying to make their job easier. And they still care about prioritization just like management. So what we can do for technical staff is issue actionable recommendations. Don't just say, hey, there's rampant XSS. Tell them how they can fix that. Tell them exactly where that is. Give them a couple of recommendations on what you would implement in order to remediate that. And this is one of those things where if you just take the time to write a couple of sentences, these might be highly reusable. You might snipe them from another report where you had very similar findings. And right then you're saving them a bunch of research time, hours, and having to go out on a limb like, I don't know this stuff. I wasn't trained to be a secure developer. You're giving them that confidence with which to proceed forward. And that's going to help them trust your words better and get that buy-in that they are looking for as well. In line with that, you do not want to be too vendor specific. Sometimes there may only be one product or obvious solution, but where possible, give a few recommendations. And the other thing is, if you can, ask them questions. Do they already have a product stack that's leaning towards a vendor? Do they have something that they want, that they're familiar with, that they are going to be more comfortable with? A lot of times they are going to have that knowledge, they're going to have that bias, and they'll communicate that to you. And it's up to you whether or not you want to advocate for that. It's always good to throw out alternatives, even if they do have that. A lot of times we can educate them as to why something is better. Those conversations are important, and this is one of the things that we'll get into a little bit later. As I was saying earlier as well, OSINT, talking to them helps us write our report. We have to figure out what matters to them and basically repeat it to them. So, recognition of time constraints, we're also distilling standards. And we're going to talk about a good methodology in a little bit. But basically, it's our expertise that they are paying for. We don't just want to tell them, go read NIST 853 and then do those controls. That doesn't help them. You know, they've already got a lot of those controls. And we need to recognize that. We need to help them identify what their pain points are and what they really need from that standard. I'm not saying never reference a standard, always reference your standards, but that doesn't mean that you should be directing them to read that entire thing. The more clear guidance that you can give them in one location is what's going to improve the quality of your report. Final point on this slide here, recognize that some fires will never die. Just because they have major organizational issues or system deficiencies or whatever, some things are just going to be that way. How many of you have heard it's a legacy system? We have to have it that way, right? And that's okay. Like, these are things that we just have to manage to and accept. And I think qualifying that in your reports, the more awareness that you have, the more understanding that you have of their organization, instead of saying, hey, the sky is falling, you can say, you guys are aware that you have a legacy application that requires these ports to be open. We recommend X, Y, and Z to further protect these things. That's fine. Or maybe you don't have additional recommendations. That's fine too. It's okay for them not to have perfect security. Moving target, right? No such thing. So how does all of this play out? Basically, we have one really aggregated risk that goes to executive management. That's what they need to understand. They need to understand that business impact. Management is probably going to be trying to manage 3 risks that are associated with that. And the technical staff has, in this case, 7 findings that are aggregated into those 3 risks. And that's because of that similarity, right? So walking through this, what's the real deal? Inadequate input validation, lawsuits, loss of reputation, spend some money, fix your code. Whatever our recommendation for that is, that's our message that has to come across to senior management. That's it. It's that simple. It needs to be that short and that clear. And if they have further detail about that, that's fine. That's great. If they need more understanding, that is what we can help them with. That is what management can help them with. But the immediate message should be nice, brief, and as aggregated as possible. Do not repeat yourselves. To management, we have 3 risks. And this is because going through our frameworks and our standards, a lot of times we have so much overlapping controls. Or even if the controls aren't overlapping, we have a correlated root cause that, oh, well then these 6 tests are going to fail, and it kind of comes back to this. So a lot of that is going to be, hey, remediate this, and then remediate that. These are valid recommendations, but that's at the technical level. And this is where, yes, they need that explicit guidance. Yes, they need all of that detail. They care about what's wrong. And there's going to be a lot more action items associated with that than we really need to communicate to management and executive management. They still need that awareness. What generally happens with this? How do our 3 audiences read our report? All 3 levels are most likely going to read the executive summary. And the reason for that is they want to know what is being messaged up, and also what's the highest level of understanding. Like, what are you saying in the rest of this report that you can't say in a page or 2? Do I need to care about that? Management's probably going to jump to your findings summary. They're going to care about those risks. Oh, what do I have to understand? What do I have to explain? What do I have to manage? Technical staff, usually this is going to be divvied up. It's not like, hey, you need to read this entire report. This is management's job to assign these things, right? Like, hey, this is going to devs, this is going to ops. Oh, wait, this is going to management. That's part of their task. So facilitating all of these things is good. That's our goal here. Our goal is not to write a report that is so completely engaging that people want to read it from beginning to end. That's what fiction is for. So writing right. Clear scope. I know I've said this a few times, but this is what is so critical to a good report, is knowing what you're actually writing about. Our technical detail, not a question. We do our test. We know what we did. We have our evidence. We have our findings. We can communicate this. That's the easiest part of the report. It's also the part that generally takes the most time to pull off, right? That is devil in the details. This is what we're trying to do. And oftentimes we get so caught up in trying to be complete and exhaustive in our testing that we neglect that we have to message that testing back to a couple of audiences. So the scope kind of helps keep us on track. It's our roadmap for what this report needs to contain and what we should do in our engagement. We do not get the freedom generally to do whatever we want on these engagements. So anything that we can do above and beyond that scope, that's great, but the odds are you're probably going to be struggling just to fulfill your scope in the time frame that you've been given. So let's make sure that we're at least successful with that, and that understanding of scope is absolutely critical to that. It's also really critical to include that scope in a report. We need to remind our clients what this report entails and what it doesn't. And that goes into meeting our requirements. So this slide here, originally, this whole presentation was going to be about how writing a security report is just like writing a piece of fiction. We are kind of the heroes in our own story, and this is a hard thing to sell, but when you write a report, you still have plot lines and all of these things. And then as I got into doing this, I was like, you know what, that doesn't really make so much sense anymore. Like, it's kind of a neat idea, but no. And then I was like, well, you know what, like, maybe we'll just do it as crafted in Ode or something like that. Yeah, making an attack. That's writing a report, right? We're just adhering to a protocol. And these things are true, but they're, not a compelling way to frame an entire report. So common deficiencies, just like my initial approaches were deficient. What are some of our common struggles, not with our report, but going back to the original problem statement that we had addressed? A lot of times we are assuming that they care about information security. That's not always the case. There's a talk later today about K through 12 education and security. They've had laws on the books for years. I've worked in education, and these are people that are absolutely, completely devoted to education. And it's not that they don't take privacy and security seriously. It's that they're trying so much to improve the quality of education that they don't have the time to take security seriously. Like, we see this in a lot of industries, right? This is very, very common. So when we have an engagement like this, it's even more important that we put on a professional air that communicates to them, we're information security, we're real, we matter. Like, we have to figure out how to apply that to their level of understanding so that they say, hey, we need to care more about security. If we're not doing that, our messaging is failing. And that is our fault. And that's one of the things that we really need to work on. Just like it takes two to have a conversation, if you're not communicating clearly, it's not just on the listener, right? So we have to revisit our approach, try again. Hand in hand with that, assuming that they care about the contents of the report. They can care about security and not care about the report. If this is a compliance effort, yeah, we did that pen test, it's cool. Does that mean they're going to do anything with it? And this is where having a compelling report, even if they don't care about this, you're gonna give them a little bit of a red flag, like, oh wait, maybe we should care more about that. or we weren't fully appreciating the gravity of that situation. These are all opportunities for your report to succeed beyond just doing an assessment or doing a test, but really helping out your clients. Assuming that the audience will read every word, and we're going to cover too little and too much detail at the same time here. We write for the three audiences to drill down that level of detail, allowing them to check out of that report when they are done. And I already covered this. That is perfectly fine. Don't expect them to read the whole thing. Do try to communicate as much as possible, and I think that this is where we don't care about word count, but we do care about balancing out that messaging. And this kind of goes with getting that buy-in to security, right? We have to have that ability to communicate in consistent terminology that balances out where they're at as a business and where they need to go. And helping them connect those dots is what is so difficult with this. If we say too little or we assume understanding, we may come across as arrogance. Or as arrogant, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to be patronizing. We want to help them. So it comes back to knowing that client audience. And again, that goes back to scope. The more you know about them, the better that you can write this report for them. I think one of the other things to really get us over some of our failings with report writing, recognizing that this report lives on. There are few better things than to come back to a client site a year later or something and have somebody say, "Oh, you guys did that report? Man, that really helped us." Or, "We're still managing to that," or whatever. Like, that's a really successful delivery. Like, this is what we're looking to do. So unwanted scope. What's the flip side of defining the scope? But why are we writing this report? Hopefully we have a client that wants to mature their organization. If they don't and they're skeptical, they're probably still outlining specific concerns that facets of the organization do care about, and that's really what we need to address. So if you can, this is the third time I've said this, but if you can find that advocate, if you can find somebody that has that value, take what they're trying to say and figure out how you can message to that. You know, they're already on your side. You need to show that you're on their side by pursuing what they're after and developing that and delivering it. And this is one of those things that's hard, and it does come down to having those interactions. If you have checkpoint meetings with the client and you can talk to them at points throughout the engagement, that really helps us not just stay on track with scope, but it also a lot of times gives us clue, right? I mean, it's critical to pen test sometimes, like, "Oh, did you guys notice that?" "No, we didn't." "Ooh, I need to dig deeper on that then," right? Like, I mean, it's social engineering, it still counts. So a lot of times we can leverage those meetings to kind of refine what we're doing and keep that in the back of our mind as we're writing our reports. So we ask the client, we repeat ourselves 3 times, and we assess and we test. So all of this does require a level of communication throughout the engagement. If we do identify major findings and risks, we want to put those in front of them as early as possible. And there are going to be a lot of times when they say, "Oh yeah, we knew that," or "We really suspected that." That helps us to know that we're on the right path for tracking down some of their pain points and working to address these things. And it also helps us build that relationship that we need for them to trust us, because we're not waiting for the report to say, "You guys got pwned really hard." we're saying, hey, this is a high risk. You guys should start planning for remediation. This is what we are going to recommend. Get out in front of it. Do not wait for your report. That way they're not surprised when they read the report, and they're going to be more receptive to the message that you have with the report. The other thing in line with that is don't just hand off the report, we're done, give us a check. Give them that report, give them 5 business days or so to review that report, clarify things, have them, put in comments or maybe even red line changes. They cannot change your messaging, but they can identify weaknesses in your report that you can correct and give them a more mature product. Give them that opportunity, because with security being security, we want to make sure that we have that buy-in and understanding where they're like, you know what, like, I thought these were bad guys, but actually they're really trying to help us. I mean, that's what we're all here for, right? We are on the side of our clients, which is often a really weird thing to acknowledge when you consider that we're saying, hey, fix these things, it will help you, and they don't really hear that. They hear, oh, you're telling us our stuff is good or it's not broken. That's not what we're saying, and how we say that goes into this, right? So by letting them be a part of that discussion, by saying, hey, this is what we're finding, high risk coming down the line, this will be in our report, and by giving them that report to review and say, you know what, I don't understand why you're saying this. There's other opportunities for them to say things like, oh, you know what, that's not true. And that might revise your approach as well. And so, again, your report is going to be more accurate the more that you listen to your client and reiterate what they are saying with your evidence and the results of our assessment and testing efforts, right? So the other thing that we can do is write a little bit better. And I think that this is one of those humbling things that I've definitely discovered throughout my career is I didn't fully retain everything that I learned about English. As IT people, I think a lot of us think in a very systematic algorithmic approach. So it's A plus B is equal to C. This makes sense to us, right? Here's some evidence, here's some more evidence, here's the result of that evidence. That's not how we should be writing. It's essays, high school essays, middle school essays. You start with your topic sentence. Bam! Put that out there first. So there's elements of both technical writing and analytical writing that matter to us, and this kind of compares the major points of that. Our technical writing is explanatory in nature. Think reading a help file. That's technical writing. Analytical writing, expository in nature. We are trying to sell a point, which is what we're really trying to do with our reports, right? We're trying to say, hey, this is true and this is why it matters. That's proven an argument. We have evidence that goes into that argument, and this is what your takeaway is. Technical writing, which we often default to in IT, is more procedural, whereas analytical writing is more categorized, structured. I like structure. I was a DBA for a decade and a half or so. I like that normalization. And I think that by breaking these things up, it makes it much easier to digest, because we're saying, hey, here's a subject line. We're not constantly switching gears like we are when we're reading through a findings summary. So that organization that goes into it can help. Technical writing and analytical writing, we have different audiences, and our report has to hit all three of these audiences, which is really a specialized audience, 3 specialized audience, which is the same as a wide audience, right? We have this depth here, so there's a spanning. So it's not really that your report should say it will be just a technical report or it will be just an analytical report. Elements of both of these things are really valuable to refining our approach to this. Starting with your conclusion, like I said, that topic sentence, it needs to be the most important piece of that paragraph. If they stop reading that paragraph, do they understand everything that went into that paragraph? Yes. Good. Are they still hooked? Great. Give them evidence. Give them additional clarifying detail. But it's almost like an inverted pyramid of importance here where you should be saying, this is what you really need to understand. If you get that, then maybe you care about this detail and this detail and this detail. Active voice, subject performs the action. This tends to be less wordy, which is also a bonus. And all that this really means is, really like follow Word's grammar check. Word's grammar check has gotten really good. Like if you say in order to, I'll put the little squiggly line and say, that's excessive wording, just change it to to, right? So we don't even have to think about this stuff like we did a couple of years ago, so pay attention to Word's grammar check. But basically, active voice is saying things like, the dog bit the man, instead of, the man was bitten by the dog. So you're making it easier, bam, bam, bam. Less words. That structure that goes into doing all of this, that also kind of helps with our digestion and our aggregation, and it helps us with figuring out what applies to senior management and what applies to management. And I think outlining is a great way to go about this, and I think a lot of technical people sell themselves short with their ability to write well. They say, I don't write good. Well, can you write an outline? Yeah, I can come up with some points and then organize those points. That's not so hard. And once you start doing that, I think a lot of technical people, one of their problems is they are kind of tunnel visioned in their writing. So they write something and then they go on to the next point and the next point, and then they kind of repeat that first point. By outlining this, you're going to catch those repetitions. You're going to help yourself structure that a lot better. It doesn't take that much time to write an outline. An outline is a great starting point for any report. As you're doing your testing, hopefully you are taking notes and you're saying, oh wait, we have XSS. We've got SQL injection. We clearly have some input validation risks. Make a note of that. Like, identify those things that you think are going to feed into an aggregated level of detail as you're doing the work. That's going to help you say, oh yeah, we have that again. I already have a note. Now we're at like 3 findings for that same risk. That helps you build all of that out as you're doing the work. Placeholders are another great way to do this. Everybody kind of does this differently. I just, developer habits, to do : and then it's an easy thing to search for. I go into my report, I search for all of my to-dos, either I'm done or I'm not done yet, right? Our framing, and this is another aspect where we have to be consistent. I'm going to say scope for the 9th time. That defines our what, our business objectives. We already covered why this is so important, but it's also the why of the report. This is why we are executing this engagement. And we have to remind our clients of that. We want them to be clear that this scope is accurate because we're trying to help you accomplish these things. Impact, likelihood, and remediation. We're talking about ultimately trying to save them time, where time is money, effort, whatever it is, reputation. All of these things have to do with us issuing those actionable recommendations, right? We want them to be out there fixing things, and they are paying us for prioritization of what to fix, as well as the identification, right? A lot of times we think that this just comes down to all that we have to do is identify what's wrong, but that is not all that we have to do. We have to help them out with prioritization. So the voice of our report, this is another one of these things that should be consistent. Use that active voice and use the third person. Third person is a little bit detached, so it comes across as a little bit more authoritative and unbiased at the same time. You do not want to write in first person. That comes across as storytelling. And report contents. We have a structure that we're going to want to repeat. This does not need to change over time. You come up with a structure, you come up with a template, bam, you're good to go. Tool set. A lot of the things that we do, if we are working against a framework and we consistently work against that framework, use a tool that facilitates that. We have some testing frameworks that are out there. Dratus, Layer, there's the old XML one, Tree, whatever it was, I don't even remember, but that was a good one back in the day. All of these things help us repeat efforts, which reduces the amount of time that we have to spend writing and organizing. And having that structure is what really saves us time in reporting. And the more of these reports that we do, and the better that we get at aggregating, and the better that we get at that messaging, the easier it is to reuse some of those things. If you cited some great statistics and you had a couple of risks that are really similar, you should be using that as a baseline. If you have a tool to track all of these risks over time, it really saves you time. And it doesn't just save you time, but it makes it so that since you now have more time, you can improve what you're actually saying. Like, go agile on this stuff. It's just another kind of writing, right? Make it an iterative approach. Leveraging of mappings, templates, like all of these are obvious tools that we can use even if we don't really think about them in a writing context. But there are things that are out there, and that's where making your product consistent and repeatable definitely can help you out. I already covered this here, but I didn't start with this talk just being unformatted like this. And this is where Faulkner had a famous quote, "Kill your darlings." And what he meant by that was, you have something that you really like and you want to use, that doesn't mean that it makes sense. So you got to be willing to get rid of that. And I think that we as a community are great about reinventing ourselves. So this should be one of these things that we need to start challenging ourselves on more. We really like to make a tool, but let's finish those tools. Let's recognize that that tool is not the entirety of the report that we need to deliver. So some of the things that you can do to improve finding that voice, just shoring up. There's Elements of Style by Strunk. Great book. It's like 50 pages. You can just read the bolded headlines and, oh yeah, I remember that from school. These are great little reminders. This quote at the bottom of the page is from Analytical Writing Guide, another very, very short book that has some great reminders for how you can do these things. There's also a lot of really bad books out there. I wouldn't recommend any technical writing books. I did my first Amazon review and it was like, hey, this book is not adhering to anything that it recommends. None of this stuff should take that much time. So they're great reminders, and there's great little articles out there on the internet for you guys. Feel free to hit me up if you want any additional detail or whatever. And with that, I think we've got like about a minute or two left for questions. Are there any? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Is there something you do mock reports? What do you do to kind of get experience in regards to writing reports and following that flow once you determine what you want to do?
I think a great way to work on that is to do write-ups for CTFs or VulnHub exercises or whatever. Practice communicating, this is what I found, this is why it matters, this is how to fix it. Look at other people's write-ups, and I think the CTF write-ups are a great example because there are some people that are rock stars. They have great levels of detail out there, and this is fantastic. And then you'll also see the majority of these write-ups. They fail because they assume a level of understanding. So always kind of write for that beginner's mind. Assume that they know enough to be dangerous, but you don't have to explain everything like click start. But at the same time, make sure that you're explaining everything that you do. Try to educate that beginner. Great question. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Thank you.